Are you just starting out with MMA? If so, watch this short video because I'm going to give you 8 most important tips for MMA beginners. Coming up. Hi, my name is Mark Leichner from MMAcoach.net, where we teach coaches, fighters and enthusiasts how to train smart and not just hard. And in today's video, I'm going to give you 8 most important tips for MMA beginners. The first tip is to be on time. Don't be late. Every coach hates students that are late because it's a sign of disrespect. So show up on time. Now, coaches shouldn't be Nazi about this because people can have good reasons for being late. But more often than not, students are late because they left home later than they should have. So maybe they were on Facebook or on YouTube too much, they didn't leave on time, so they're late. So be on time. Number 2 is to listen to your coach and don't ask superfluous questions. So what does this mean? You should listen to your coach and concentrate on what he's saying. And you should definitely ask questions because this is the way to learn. But don't ask questions that have nothing to do with what you're learning. So if your coach is showing you a basic double leg takedown, don't ask him about a flying triangle or something. So stick to asking questions about the techniques that your coach is showing you. Number 3 is stop bodybuilding if you're doing it. Now, I've had some students that have done bodybuilding before they came to MMA and that they're still doing bodybuilding even though they're training MMA. Now, while planned strength training can be good for MMA, bodybuilding is not. Why? Because in bodybuilding, the goal is to have as much mass and definition as possible, which contradicts with MMA's goals, which is fighting form, so you can be very effective in fighting. In bodybuilding, you tend to lift a low to moderate weight with a lot of reps, so you can get what they call the pump. This tires your muscle very much, so you won't have too much energy when you go to your MMA training for all the MMA drills that you're doing. And of course, your movement will be rigid because you're training rigidly in the gym, and in MMA you should be loose. Your punches should be loose, your double legs, your ground fighting, and etc. So at least in the beginning, stop bodybuilding or switch to proper weight training, where the goal is to get stronger, not to get bigger, where the goal is to get stronger and more athletic. But the best, in my opinion, at least in the beginning, is to stop weight training totally until you get some MMA techniques again, until you get some experience. Tip number 4 is to execute techniques slow at first. When learning new technique, it is imperative to perform it slowly and with little strength in order to learn it properly. Otherwise, we will learn it incorrectly and it is very hard to correct it later. When learning new technique, students often execute it too fast and too strong, most often because that way the technique looks more combative, probably thinking that slow execution doesn't look tough enough. They also do it to impress the instructor. This only makes them learn it incorrectly and it increases the time necessary for mastering the technique in question, if they ever master it, that is. In order to play a symphony, notes must be learned first, and this is achieved gradually. Only when we become comfortable doing techniques slowly can we speed it up a little bit, and using this process we can continue until we can do it at full speed. Number 5 is to stop avoiding wrestling sessions. What do I mean by that? Well, before, when I opened up my academy a long time ago, we had certain days that were reserved for certain elements. For example, Wednesday was a wrestling day. So whenever Wednesday rolled along, I noticed that there was a dip in my attendance. Beginners just did not enjoy wrestling as much as they enjoyed striking or ground fighting, because it is hard. It is very hard. Out of all 3 elements, striking, wrestling and ground fighting, wrestling is the most physically demanding, and that's why some of my students used to avoid it. But don't do that. Wrestling is one of the most important parts of MMA, maybe even the most important part. Because if you're a good striker and you want to stay on your feet and bang it out with your opponent, you need defensive wrestling. If you are a grappler and you want to take the fight to the ground, you need offensive wrestling. So either way, you need wrestling and you must not avoid it. Also, when training wrestling, you will learn how to fall down properly and not injure yourself. Number 6 is that you should leave your ego at the door. We hear this all the time from coaches, and this is a really important message. What does it mean to leave the ego at the door? First, this means that when you tap out, that's okay. It's not the end of the world, and you shouldn't perceive it as the end of the world. It's okay, this is the way you learn. Hunting for knockout is not okay. Now, you're a beginner and you still won't be sparring for some time before you learn some basics and then you will spar. But once you start sparring, don't hunt for the knockout. Don't try to hurt your opponent. That's not okay. You should outwork your opponent. You should dominate your opponent, but don't hurt him. That you can do once you start competing. But in a sparring session, this is not a good idea. And I might do a separate video about this subject, but for now, just know that you should not be doing this. The same goes for any type of attempt of injuring your opponent, maybe jerking the armbar or a leg lock or something like this. So don't injure your opponent on purpose, or your training partner, that is. Number 7 is to manage expectations and be patient. Many MMA beginners start MMA because they want to be a UFC fighter one day, which is fine. But before that happens, you have to enjoy the process. If all you are thinking about is that you will one day compete, and until that day comes you are unhappy with your level of performance, with your technique, with your wrestling, with whatever, you will not enjoy the process as much as you should. So my advice to you is to manage your expectations and be patient. This is a process, this is a journey. The outcome one day might be you becoming a UFC fighter and fighting in the octagon or whatever. But for now, concentrate on the basics, concentrate on learning the technique. Enjoy the process, enjoy all the hardships that MMA has to offer. Enjoy every nice moment that MMA has to offer. Enjoy going from one level of technique to the other level, to starting maybe competing in the amateur shows and so on and so on. You don't even have to compete. Some people, actually most people that come to MMA, that come to train MMA, will never compete. They do it recreationally. And I think that's fantastic, because when done right, recreational MMA is one of the most beautiful things you can train. And point number 8, and our final point, is to be careful with diets. What does that mean, being careful with diets? Now, you started training MMA and you heard probably that athletes have a very clean diet and that you should also eat healthy. But sometimes that can pose a problem. If the diet is too restrictive, or if the diet is very hard to follow, you will have a problem with this, and you will soon get back to your old eating habits. Now, I'm not a nutritionist and I'm not going to go into dieting in detail here, but what you need to know is that healthy eating can be done without it being a burden for you. So to simplify things, that means limiting your sugar intake as much as you can, which means ditching sodas, cakes, ice creams, whatever, whatever contains sugar as much as possible. That alone will do wonders for your diet. Then you can also have some protein in your every meal. If you have 3 big meals, breakfast, lunch and dinner, try to have some protein within each meal. So in breakfast that can be eggs, and at lunch that can be a piece of chicken, and at dinner that can be something else. Another thing you can do is that you don't have to eat until you're completely full. Now, these things will give you a result and simplify your nutrition. But if you're overweight, it might be a good idea to consult a nutritionist and start with some diet. What do you think are the most important things for an MMA beginner? Let me know in the comments below. If this is your first time here and you're into MMA training, subscribe and you will get a lot of cool content every week. Also, check out my free MMA course called How to Master MMA by clicking here. My name is Mark Leichner from MMAcoach.net, and I will see you again very soon.